David or David 1040 before Christ, commonly known by Orthodox Christians as Saint David, was the second king of the United Kingdom of Israel, with its first capital in Jerusalem. He was the son of Jesse, the Ephrathias, the Perez clan and the descendant of Judah, and was born in Bethlehem around 1040 before Christ. He was chosen by God to govern the nation of Israel after the corruption of Saul, who was chosen by the people, suffering persecutions of the latter until he became king over the tribe of Judah with the death of the monarch, and, after the assassination of Ishbosheth, Saul's youngest son and successor, he was proclaimed king over all of Israel. The archaeological discoveries of the Tel Dan Stele and the Moabite stoneware citations to the kingdom of Judah and the house of David are found, placing the kingdom of Judah and the Davidic dynasty in an extra-biblical historical context, demystifying the Enlightenment belief, which placed them as part of biblical mythology. See Biblical criticism and criticism of the Bible. However, the life of the character, David, can only be described through the biblical story. The Catholic Church considers David a saint and his liturgical feast day is December 16. Biography. The books of Samuel, I Samuel and 2 Samuel, deal with his personal and monarchical life. David is described as being a valuable man, drawing Saul's attention because of his skill as a musician. He was a harpist, which earned him a place in the royal circle. Later, with the battles against the Philistines, he became recognized as a great warrior and Saul gave his daughter Michal as his wife, Jonathan the king's son, and became a close friend. As for the description of David as a man of war, he fought the Philistines in the city of Keilah, but when Saul considered him a rebel, fled to the desert, a place on the fringes of society, David gathered a small army, starting his mercenary life, serving as a mercenary for the Philistines, King Achish of Gath, and defending the city of Ziklag for a year and 4 months. It was at this time that David truly became an adversary for Saul, as leader, and a force to be feared by the Philistines, King Achish of Gath, and a force to be feared by the Philistines. Atheists, who even called him king of the earth. Because of the truncated narrative between chapters 16 and 17 of the first book of Samuel, there are historians who highlight the fact that David the musician and harp player is a distinct tradition from David as a war figure as described above, a tradition that was later attached to the character's saga. With the death of Saul and 3 of his sons in the Battle of Gilboa, Israel had lost part of the territory west of the Jordan, while Ishbosheth, Saul's successor, stayed east, in Mahanaim, with the support of Abner, Saul's general. In the second book of Samuel, the death of Ishbosheth is reported by his own men, David executing them, just as he did with the Amalekite who brought the news of Saul's death. Although the Amalekite was not responsible for the king's death, he told David that he had killed him, thinking that he would win honors on his part, and, as a result, David ended up becoming king of Judah and Israel anointed in Hebron. David consolidated the unified kingdom of Israel, after defeating the Canaanite tribe of the Jebusites, made Jerusalem its political capital, religious center, and royal residence, transferring to it the former national sanctuary, the Ark of the Covenant, in a solemn procession with sacrifices, in which he himself featured prominently as a worshipper and celebrant. In memory of their migrations in the desert, the ark was initially placed in a tent. David thought of building a magnificent temple for himself in Jerusalem, but was dissuaded by the prophet Nathan. According to the biblical narrative, King David successfully led the people on excursions against other peoples, made political alliances with other kings and chiefs, one of those alliances being sealed with marriage and gathering a heir. In Jerusalem, David appointed a council of wise men, created an army that included an honor guard and a royal guard for the palace. To this end, David subdued the tribes of Israel. Judah was not taxed, by taxing them to supply armies and construction projects. It created a feudal system of partitioning land under the crown, thus replacing the old system of tribal divisions. David and Goliath. Goliath of Gath was the champion of the Philistines, the invading people who occupied the region of the cities of Gath, Ashdod and Ashkelon, where today the region known as the Gaza Strip is located. The Philistines were advancing far into the center of Israel's territory in a major campaign and had camped between the villages of Socho and Azekah to face Israel in the Elah Valley. Goliath was the champion of the Philistine army during that invasion when King Saul and the men of Israel went to battle in the Elah Valley. He is described as being 6 cubits and 1 inch tall, 2.92 meters, wearing a bronze helmet on his head, and wearing a bronze scaled breastplate weighing 5,000 shekels, 57 kilograms, with bronze greaves on his legs and a bronze dart between his shoulders. It is said that the rod of his spear was like a handle of tear, only the tip of the spear weighing 600 shekels of iron, 6 kilograms of iron. Insolent and furious Goliath challenged the Israeli army during the day by shouting in the valley at the soldiers above the hill of Azekah, and confident in his strength, experience, and large size, he challenged an Israeli champion to face him in a unique duel, on the condition that the people of the champion who were killed would surrender and become slaves to the people of the winner. Davi is sent by his father with some food, cheese, bread, toasted corn, to his brothers and to the commander of his brothers who are in the Israeli army when he hears the challenge of the giant in the valley. David asks some soldiers what reward there would be for the man who dared to defeat the giant, and King Saul hears about a boy David asking among the soldiers and asks him to be called and interrogates him. Davi, unlike all the frightened men in the Israeli army, volunteers to fight against the giant even without being part of the army. David was Jesse's 8th son, and there were 7 brothers older than him, and of these 7, only 3 of the oldest were in the army. The military enlistment age recorded in the Bible in the ancient era of Israel was 20 years, which suggests that David was probably still a teenager or too young to fight, being in the 15 to 16 age range when he faced the giant. This is because, being the 8th and youngest child, his 3 older brothers would have had to be 22, 21 and 20 years old to be within the minimum military age, and, after these 3 oldest children, there were 4 more brothers who were not soldiers or were not yet old enough to be. They should have been 19, 18, 17 and 16 years old, which suggests that David, being the youngest, should have been 15 years old. King Saul hears David's proposal and at first hesitates, saying that he was just a boy and that Goliath was an experienced and famous man of war, which reinforces David's minority. King Saul tells him, "You cannot go fight against the Philistine because you are a boy and he has been a man, a warrior since his youth." 1 Samuel 17:33. The Hebrew word used for boy in the verse is ner, and for from his youth it is neral. But after hearing David's courageous religious appeal, reporting that he had killed lions and bears to protect his father's sheep and that the God of Israel helped him, 1 Samuel 17:34-37, the king accepts and sends him. King Saul is still trying to equip David with the best armor, his own king's armor, and his weapons, but David discovers that the equipment prevents his movement and is too heavy for him, reinforcing again the idea that he was still a boy without an adult body, so he discards it and goes to fight in plain clothes, takes his shepherd's staff and chooses 5 smooth stones or rolled stones, pebbles, from the stream of the Elah Valley to be used in his slingshot. Funda, the giant will be sitting in the middle of the valley, in the company of his waiting for an Israeli challenger going down for combat. The 2 armies were above 2 hills facing each other that borders the Elah Valley, also known as the Valley of the Turbans. David descends the slope of the valley where there is a stream to collect his stones and then walks in the direction of the giant, who at first does not imagine that the boy David is his adversary till he is notified by his squire. This is implied when he approaches David without dispatching the squire, since the warriors only dispatched them only at the time of the duel, 1 Samuel 17:41. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his squire in front, was getting closer to David. After noticing that the boy David was coming towards him as an adversary, Goliath feels disrespected because he is an experienced soldier and asks if David is not mocking him. "Am I a dog, to come face me with a stick?" The Bible doesn't give much detail about the combat, but it says that after exchanging threats and starting a movement, the giant is shot in the head. David defeats Goliath, with a stone, a slingshot, between his eyes that faints him, and quickly uses his own sword to decapitate him while he is unconscious or dizzy. David and Bathsheba. During a siege against the Ammonite capital of Rabbah, David remains in Jerusalem. He spies on a woman, Bathsheba, bathing on a nearby rooftop and summons her. She becomes pregnant. The text in the Bible does not state explicitly whether Bathsheba consented or not. David calls his husband, Uriah the Hittite, back to rest, hoping that he will go home to his wife and believe that the child is his. Uriah doesn't visit his wife, so David conspires to indirectly kill him. The next morning, David wrote a letter to Joab, saying the following: "Put Uriah at the front, at the strongest of the battle, and leave him so that he may be wounded and die." David then marries his widow, Bathsheba. In response, Nathan prophesies the punishment that will befall him, stating that the sword will never leave your house. When David recognizes the sin, Nathan comforts him and says, his sin is forgiven and will not die, but the child will die. In fulfillment of Nathan's words, David's son died after 7 days of life, Sam 12:18. In addition, Absalom, fueled by vengeance and desire for power, rebels and dies. David and Nathan. With the death of Saul's son, the elders of Israel come to Hebron and David is anointed king of all Israel. He conquers Jerusalem, formerly a Jebusite fortress, and makes it his capital. He brings the Ark of the Covenant to the city with the intention of building a temple for God, but the prophet Nathan prohibits it, prophesying that the temple would be built by one of his sons. Nathan also prophesies that God made a pact with the house of David stating, his throne will be established forever. David achieves victories over the Philistines, Moabites, Edomites, Amalekites, Ammonites, and King Hadadezer of Aram Zobah. David and Absalom. The story of Absalom's revolt places David as a loving but weak father who could not control his rebellious children. Absalom's resentment over his father's failure to punish his half-brother, Amnon, for raping his, Absalom's, sister, Tamar, leads him to assassinate Amnon and then revolt against David. David, completely taken by surprise, had to flee through the Jordan. He gathered his old and successful troop and Absalom's forces were disrupted in the battle of the forest of Ephraim, riding a mule. He is caught by his long hair on the branches of a tree where, contrary to David's order, he is killed by Joab, the commander of David's army. David mourns the death of his favorite son. "Oh my son Absalom, my son Absalom. I would have died in your place, O Absalom, my son, my son." Until Joab convinces him to recover from the extravagance of his pain and to fulfill his duty to his people. David is escorted across the Jordan River back to Jerusalem by the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. David and Adonias. Adonias, after the death of Absalom, gathered around him a priest, Abiathar, and the commander of the Israeli army, Joab. This group tried to crown Adonias king of Israel in the middle of a party at the Ein Rogel fountain, where Adonias would offer sacrifices, in the presence of the court and all his brothers, sons of King David, except Solomon. However, Solomon's party, which included his mother, Bathsheba, the prophet Nathan, the priest Zadok, and the commander Benaiah, reacted quickly. David and Solomon. Bathsheba and Nathan go to David and obtain his agreement to crown Solomon, Bathsheba's son. According to the previous promise made by David, Adonias' revolt is overthrown. David dies at the age of 70 after reigning for 7 years as king of Judah and 33 in Jerusalem as king of all Israel. On his deathbed he advises Solomon to walk in God's ways and take revenge on his enemies. David and the Psalms. Several psalms from the Bible, about 73, are attributed to David. Some modern critics, however, dispute David's authorship and claim that it is a pseudo-epigraph, seeking to prove that some psalms are historically dated after David's death. However, the psalms attributed to David are Psalms 3, 9/Psalm 11, 41/Psalm 51, 65/Psalm 68, 70/Psalm 86 to 70/Psalm 86 Psalm 101 Psalm 103 Psalm 108 110 Psalm 124 Psalm 124 Psalm 131 Psalm 133 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 Psalm. Archaeological data. With archaeology and the discovery of the Tel de Stella by a commemorating king, the conquest of the House of David, where the text continues to describe how he conquered and overthrew the place where the divinity of the House of David was worshipped and built in its place a place of worship for his God. The Moabite stone dating from the same period, making mention of the Israel of Omri and her sons.
The relief of Pharaoh Sisak I, a relief dedicated to Amun-Ra, where the pharaoh gives an account of his achievements in the Near East, which according to the Egyptologist and biblical historian Kenneth Kitchen, contains a quote that says David's high place, but, due to the fact that the relief was damaged at the time of the Ottoman Empire, its interpretation is now questionable. From these discoveries, the date of David's existence can be determined at ca. 1040 to 970 before Christ. Along with the biblical account, he reigned under Judah in ca. 1010 to 1003 BC and over the whole unified kingdom of Israel ca. 1003 to 970 before Christ. Characteristics of King David. Courage. David showed courage when he faced the giant Goliath in individual combat when he was just a young shepherd. His trust in God and his skill with the sling allowed him to win the battle. Faith. David was deeply religious and had a strong faith in God. He is known to have composed many of the Psalms, which are expressions of worship and trust in God. Musical ability. David was a talented musician and harp player. He was known for calming King Saul with his music and is credited as the author of many of the Psalms. Leadership. David became the second king of Israel and is considered one of its most successful rulers. He unified the tribes of Israel, expanded the kingdom's borders, and established Jerusalem as its capital. Compassion. Although he made mistakes in his life, David also showed compassion and generosity. He showed mercy to Saul, his enemy, on several occasions, and cared for Mephibosheth, the son of his friend Jonathan, even after their death. Repentance. David is also known for his humility and repentance. After committing adultery with Bathsheba and orchestrating the death of her husband Uriah, he was confronted by the prophet Nathan and expressed deep regret for his sins. Establishment of the dynasty. God promised David that his descent would remain on the throne of Israel forever. This promise was fulfilled in Jesus Christ, considered by Christians to be a descendant of David. It is important to note that the figure of David is mainly described in the Bible, and some characteristics may vary depending on theological interpretation and religious traditions.